Բարի օր, ես Աստղիկ Սարգսյանն եմ։ Իմ հյուրն այսօր ամերիկահայ գրող, իրավունքի մասնագետ, ակտիվիստ, քաղաքական գործիչ, բարերար Աննա Աստվածատուրյան Թերքոթն է։ Mrs. Աստվածատուրյան, thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let us start with what brings you to Armenia.
This time, I'm coming with the publication of the Armenian translation of my book, which I wrote at 14 years old, and which was
so
based,
early.
Yes, between ages of 14 and 16. I was basing it on my diaries. I wrote during the violence in Baku, which my family survived, and the few years we lived in Armenia as refugees. So after 10 years of first publishing it in English and Russian, it's coming out in Armenian, and I'm very proud to be here for that.
Mrs. Astվածատուրյան, your book, Nowhere, A Story of Exile, talks about your escape from Baku and your family's survival. It talks about how you had to overcome all this and the trauma you experienced. What was it like for an ethnic Armenian to live in Azerbaijan, and what were the circumstances of your departure?
The first, 10 years of my life, I would say, were perfect in a sense that it was the idealistic Soviet experience, right? As happy as a Soviet life can be. We were living in a city we built, as many Baku Armenians will tell you. We felt that this was our city, and we were very
So there was
proud.
no sense of estrangement?
There was a sense of estrangement in certain circumstances. For example, getting into a university. As an Armenian, you had to pay your way into it. Being atop of a department in your workplace, that was not available to Armenians. It was always Azeri. So Armenians knew their ethnicity by just mere presence of Azerbaijani authority. So although we were doers, we were never leaders. And I think that there was also, understanding that mixed marriages were very rare and far in between. So although we lived amongst Russians and Jews and Armenians and Azeris, there was very little mixing of marriages.
Was there no sense that it was going to get worse?
I think in the 70s, I was born in 1978, so I didn't get to experience it personally, but from what I understood in my family's discussions is that the Armenian schools started being closed. They were closing Armenian schools in the 70s, and so there was a decision between either Azeri-speaking school or a Russian-speaking school. So a lot of Baku Armenians were attending Russian schools, so then the nationalistic drive of anything but Azeri. And of course, they couldn't close Russian schools, but so that nationalistic Azerbaijani history and Azerbaijani presence in the region, that was being louder and louder through the 70s and then 1980s. And then, of course, with Sumgait violence that was response to Nagorno-Karabakh movement. That was kind of the pinnacle. It was shocking because although there's anti-Armenianism that existed in the villages, the genocidal kind of commentary always existed, but never in Baku. You had intellectuals, you had multicultural experience, and that could never happen in Baku. So when Sumgait and Kirovabad started, we thought that would never happen here. My mom just couldn't believe it. But then it was just getting worse and worse with, the Russian tanks, Soviet tanks coming in and out. And so when they would come in, things would calm down, and people kind of calmed down. Okay, this will never happen in the Soviet Union. And then the tanks would leave and violence start again.
All right. They often compare your book to Anna Frank's diary. How do you see this comparison?
It's uncomfortable for me because Anne Frank died as a child and in the most horrific way, and lost all her family, and I think the father was only
thank
survived.
God this was not your case.
Yes, absolutely. So I feel very uncomfortable. At the same time, I understand that her story drove a lot of the advocacy against anti-Semitism, and having that personal story was very important for the Jewish community to show the pain. This is not just masses of people that were slaughtered, they were individuals that were slaughtered. And I think in many ways this book and some other personal accounts published by Baku Armenians are very important in telling our story on a personal level.
By an eloquent juxtaposition, you are a survivor of the Baku massacres yourself, and you're also an expert in international law, basically, in a practical sense. We understand, like, what led to the other, that the first led to the other, and you work to show the world that ethnic Armenians cannot be treated well in Azerbaijan, that, as we well know, is no advocate of human rights, is no defender of human rights, and especially those of ethnic Armenians. Why do you think that what you do matters in the current, in the present geopolitical context?
With the publication of my book, a lot of doors open to speak on behalf of Artsakh community, Artsakh Armenians, that what happened to Baku Armenians, we were citizens of Azerbaijani Republic, and we were treated in such a manner. So if Artsakhis were ever under Azeri control, this same thing would happen to them. And there were a lot of threads that tied that experience together. It's a continuation, for my grandfather to survive 1915, and then 1918 in Baku, he survived the massacres of Armenians, and then made a decision to go back to Baku in 1940s, not knowing that that would lead to us being persecuted. So that experience continued through the Artsakh War and also the massacres in Maraga, for example, and the 2020 crimes against humanity. So connecting those dots was very important on international community. I've spoken to members of Congress on several occasions at the U.S. Congress, at members of our British Parliament and European Parliament, and in theory, in those conversations that made sense. But I think that there's the reality of the crimes in the legal sense, and then there is the political reality, and that's where I feel like a lot of ground was not covered.
As you mentioned, because you mentioned the political reality, we often hear President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan say that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are citizens of Azerbaijan, and that other ethnic minorities live in Azerbaijan, and therefore the people in Artsakh can live within the territory of Azerbaijan as well. Do you believe that this is true?
Absolutely not. I mean, that government also says that the 60,000 Armenians from Baku that live in the United States are part of Azerbaijani diaspora. So it's humorous if it wasn't so dangerous. I would love to hear from the communities of minorities in Azerbaijan on how they're treated. Are they even allowed to practice their cultural and religious practices? They're not. A lot of talk for the last 30 years has been very, there's duality in what he says to the international community and what he says to his own people. And now what he says to his own people, which is outrageous, is becoming a norm for him to, speak to the international community, because there's that bravado after the war and pure hatred that he just demonstrates. So absolutely do not believe it. I think that many Baku Armenians will understand Artsakhis if Artsakh was ever in the control of Azerbaijan, that they will leave, and there will be massacres. There will be, if not government orchestrated, which I would believe they would be, there would be people who are brainwashed to hate Armenians, to think of us as lesser than humans, and that's the first stage of genocide, is dehumanization of people, and as you've seen over the years, even during COVID, referred to us as viruses and as cockroaches. So I cannot even imagine that that be a possibility and for the community to stay there.
Except for Baku, the rest of the world recognizes that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict stays and is not resolved. Do you see any legal window of resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in a legal way? Maybe within the framework of the international principles of territorial integrity and the right to self-determination, although to a lay person, these two principles clash.
Yeah, I don't see at this point, any legal way. I think that there's legal components as part of the negotiations and as part of kind of the start of a conversation when these powers, whether it's our allies or if it's Azerbaijan and Armenia discussing, these legal concepts exist in international law, but are they practiced? And that's kind of the reality we're in. I think, let's say 5-10 years ago, if Armenia chose to join the International Criminal Court, which I advocated, vehemently advocated for Armenia to join as a protective mechanism. That would have been a solution. As a member and a signatory of the Rome Statute, we would have the protections. But at the time, I think it was 2014, 2015, when I brought the proposal to Ministry of Justice, it was dismissed as a dangerous, as a tool that Azerbaijan can use against Armenia. But they've always used any tool against Armenia. So waiting for them to do something out of fear and not acting, I think worked against us. As you see, in today's situation with Ukraine and Russia, ICC is also, it is a political tool, although it's a judicial organization. And it also protects the rights of its members. So in order to sign on to it, Armenia would have had to ratify the Rome Statute. At the time when I did talk to some of the members of the government, there were some constitutional obstacles which could have been overcome with the constitutional reforms that took place later on, a few years after that, and they weren't. So I think at this point there are a lot of public figures that bring up ICC, perhaps for future, but retroactively it's not going to work. Once you ratify the Rome Statute, your protections are from the moment you ratify, not backwards. And as someone who worked there, I find the body to be incredibly idealistic, the world of peace and justice. But also knowing the reality is it takes a lot of political will for the ICC to act, let alone the government and the country that aims to protect.
Mrs. Astվածատուրյան, I know that you're also a politician, and one of the, perhaps fewer than we would like them to be, one of the few successful women politicians of Armenian origin as well. We hope your success multiplies in the United States, by the way, because we've realized the traction this will bring to the cause of Armenians and the cause of the Nagorno-Karabakh people. Would you look at the issue as a politician and also an expert in law? If you do it that way, what is the complete set of political and legal tools that would help push forward the resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
It's hard to tell without knowing exactly what's happening. I think there's this sense in diaspora that things are happening and we are not aware. And I'm sure Armenians feel the same way here. I find it hard to speak to things that I don't know about. I think that there's always will for the Armenian diaspora to join Armenia. So I think that there are still tools that we can use in the diaspora to advocate for Armenian interests. I know that the American diaspora is very active in doing that. So advocating on a political level, speaking to our congressmen, speaking to them not just on the Armenian issues, but as an American. I do not want my taxpayer dollars going to fund Azerbaijani military. So that is something that's, we are trying to prevent U.S. Funding certain military programs to Azerbaijan. So acting actively toward preventing some of these, kind of smaller fights, smaller battles that we can win to also showcase that this is an aggressor. I think both the Armenian government and the Armenian diaspora did a very poor job in the last 30 years of utilizing some of these tools we had available. And I feel like Azerbaijan succeeded on that front. They're very smooth. I've seen them work. When I spoke across the world with my book coming out the first time, their embassies are always ready. Their communities are always ready. And I feel like we were very disorganized. So, and in order to, utilize some of these tools, you need to work together.
What would you call the peak of your political career, or is it yet to come?
I'm a lawyer. I'm a banker. I work for.
Sounds impressive.
Thank you.
You're a politician.
I came from Artsakh 1 year, and I decided that I knew more about, I realized that I knew more about what's going on in Artsakh than I did in my own city. And I felt very guilty because my kids were just starting school, and I wanted to improve my little city where I live. And I thought, what better way to do it than run for public office? And I had no political experience and ran completely blindly against two people and was surprisingly won 64% of the vote. I feel like the voices of not just Armenians, but immigrants in the United States are very much needed and are appreciated when that happens. It's not easy to be a public servant. So
always in the public eye.
Always in the public eye, and also, I was the only woman on the city council of 7 councilors, and I think the first woman in 30 years, and it was also difficult to speak as an immigrant, right? So you bring in your own experiences to the issues, and but little by little, I got more women to join me on the council, and now, so I think the pinnacle is becoming a president of our city council, the first woman and the first immigrant in the city's history, president of the council, which I'm very proud to be able to tell my daughter, who is a 21st century little girl who wants to be part of this world. So I don't see any other things. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing and helping my city. But you never know. Who knows? I'm very happy to be able to be given the opportunity to improve the lives of the people that I live with.
You're quite a trailblazer.
Thank you.
Is there a sequel coming?
Everyone keeps asking me ever since the English version came out, and I'm really sick of writing about myself. I have a book that was ready to go to the publisher, was ready to go to the editor, and right before the war. And it was full of hope. It was full of stories of survival, of stories that I collected over the 10 years I traveled with my book, and a lot of Baku Armenians coming up to me at events, a lot of Artsakhtsis I met, a lot of amazing people in Armenian Sunnik. I wanted to collect these stories, factual stories and write fiction to tie them all together. But with the war, the theme changed. And I feel like this is not the book I want to write. So I'm going to revisit it in 2023 and hopefully publish it then.
We'll be looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Իմ հյուրը ամերիկահայ գրող, իրավունքի մասնագետ, ակտիվիստ, քաղաքական գործիչ, բարերար Աննա Աստվածատուրյան Թերքոթն էր։ Կհանդիպենք։